All right, we're getting close. We're almost done. This would be a good place for a clicker question, right? If we were in class, to give you a break, but we've got about 12 or 13 minutes and then we're done. Remember, we talked about temperature right in the last video, how the body loses heat in response to this constant metabolic activity that's happening, right? And we talked about those 4 different ways. But it's possible, right? And in Wisconsin, it's common that we're in cold environments. So what happens in a cold environment? How do we regulate our body temperature in the cold? Well, it's the case that dermal blood vessels contract. So we'll say dermal vasoconstriction. So not as much blood is going to make it to the surface. Sweat glands are inactive. Those glands are not stimulated, and so they're not producing any sweat, and there's no or very little evaporation. Skeletal muscles contract. And this is one place where skeletal muscle contraction is involuntary. This is shivering. Rhythmic contraction with greater and greater force to produce more and more heat, right? And so shivering, that movement produces heat for the body, okay? So this is how one best deals with cold, although your body's much more adjusted, I suppose, to deal with getting rid of heat than it is to create heat. What happens if the body overheats, right? Typically, these are at temperatures of above 106 degrees, right? This is risk to life. What happens here is that proteins actually can't function, right? So when the body is at this temperature, right, proteins start to clump together, they aggregate, right? They start to unfold, they denature. And the problem here is that all of the metabolic reactions that rely on proteins can't occur because those proteins have lost their shape, okay? And so hyperthermia, when one gets too hot, is really dangerous when we exceed 105 or 106 degrees, particularly because the proteins that are required for us to live lose their shape, right? We know of hemoglobin, right? Hemoglobin is a protein that helps carry oxygen. If that protein starts to unfold and can't carry oxygen, that's bad news for us. It's the case that hyperthermia is more prevalent in humid conditions. Right? So in humid conditions, when it's humid outside, there's a lot of water vapor in the air already, right? And this prevents sweat from evaporating. So sometimes people feel when it's humid out that they're sweating more. That's actually not the case. It's just not as evaporating as readily, right? And so the sweat is present, but it can't jump phase because it's sort of trapped, right? It's sort of the air is, how would you say, saturated with water vapor already, okay? And so the sweat doesn't evaporate as well. Radiation is also reduced. Ineffective at high temps. One of the assumptions of radiation, right, is that heat was lost to cooler surroundings. Well, if those cooler surroundings are at high temperatures, there can't be any heat loss, right? And so what happens is, if these are the case and the body is in prolonged states of high temperature, right, heat exhaustion occurs. Heat So the body is unable to get rid of this excess heat. So this is kind of the body overheating. Right? So the body's overheating is heat exhaustion, followed by heat stroke. And here's where those cooling mechanisms shut down. Mechanisms. Right, so now when someone is experiencing heat stroke, even though their temperatures are getting to 104, 105, 106 degrees, right, they stop sweating because all of these mechanisms are beginning to stop because the cells are beginning to die. This is all the opposite of hypothermia, right? This is the one that we talk about in Wisconsin a lot, right? Too low of a temperature as opposed to too high of a temperature. So hypothermia occurs when extreme cold starts to kill tissue. Okay, now it's the case in hypothermia, right? So we'll come over here and we can say that the extremities the fingers, the toes, the ears may be 20 to 30 degrees, not percent, degrees below body temp. Right, so you imagine that the blood is warm, right? Due to all of the metabolic demands on the body, it heats up the blood. But it's the case in cold environments that blood is shunted to the core. It continues to circulate to the brain and to the major internal organs, but it's kept away from the surfaces. Why? Because that blood would get cold, and you don't want to circulate blood that's too cold into these core organs, right? So that's why the extremities may be a lot colder than one's internal core, right? We'd rather sacrifice a finger or a toe than a major organ. Those who have less adipose tissue, right? Because adipose is an insulator, those who have less adipose are at greater risk for hypothermia. Because again, we know the function of adipose as an insulator. Okay, that'll be all we say about temperature regulation issues, right? Hyperthermia is when the body gets too hot. Hypo, when the body gets too cold. And hyperthermia, a lot of our cooling mechanisms, they kind of get shut off, and we may experience heat exhaustion, in extreme cases, heat stroke. And hypothermia, extreme cold, triggers a response where we try to obviously get back some warmth. If we have more adipose tissue, that's easier to do. And it's also the case that when exposed to hypothermic conditions, we shunt blood away from our core, or excuse me, we shunt blood to our core such that it doesn't reach the tips of the fingers. Why? Again, it's the body's making a choice. If it's the case that certain tissue at the extremities dies off, we'll preserve the core. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about in this series of videos are what happens when there's an injury to the dermis or an injury to the epidermis. So let's start by talking about what happens when there's an injury to the epidermis. Well, we've mentioned this before, right? That because there's no nerve and because there's no blood vessels, not very much happens. A shallow break may stimulate greater epithelial cell division, but that's about it, right? Because we're not affecting any nerve and we're not affecting any blood vessels. But when a cut reaches the level of the dermis, right, that kicks off a whole series of events where blood loss has to stop and tissue repair has to happen, okay? And so the first thing that happens when there's a cut that goes below the level of the epidermis, that is, it reaches the dermis, is that there's a vascular constriction. So we're going to talk about cuts that reach the level of the dermis. So the first thing, oh man, constriction. The blood vessels on the surface squeeze to prevent blood loss, right? That's what the vascular system is, right? Network of blood vessels. After the blood vessels spasm and constrict, there's this whole series of events that's kicked off, right, in formation of a clot. So we'll talk about these steps in clot formation. The first thing that happens, and we're going to spend time talking about this when we talk about the chapter in blood, is that fibrin protein, right? So fibrin is a blood protein. So this is found in the blood, right? Circulating in the blood, starts to form fibers and becomes net-like. Right? So there's a net of fibrin. What is made of this net? Well, these long threads plus blood cells plus platelets trapped in there. So it's not just the protein fibers, but there's also blood cells that get caught up in our net, platelets, another constituent of the blood, all get trapped up in what's becoming the clot. And so that's what they're showing in this diagram, right? So here's the cut, right? This cut penetrates down deep into the dermis, and you can see that blood vessels are severed here, right? So there's some severing of blood vessels. After the clot is formed, right? So here's the clot. And so you could imagine that the fibrin protein forms this net here, right? I know red's not the best color here. So that is going to stop the bleeding, but what happens below the injury? Well, fluid from the blood and from the damaged tissue can seep through this net and dry. So that word, I promise, is supposed to be through. So tissues seep through and dry. This is the scab, right? This is the scab that we see. After that, beneath the scab, there's proliferation of epithelial cells. So we'll come to the top here. The epithelium really starts to kick it into high gear in terms of division, and it helps bridge the wound. Proliferation. All right, so what happens is these epithelial cells reach across and bridge the wound. After that, fibroblasts come into the picture. Right? So we talked about fibroblasts as being cells that are fixed, right? They don't move around. But there was one exception, this one, right? So fibroblasts migrate to the scene and they begin to secrete collagen. Right? And that helps bind the edges of this wound. So again, the goal here is to plug this while it's been plugged, and then to bridge this. And this is accomplished through fibroblasts and epithelial cells. We're close to being done, but I think I'm going to call it here. There are a few more steps. We'll pick up our steps on Monday, and we're basically through this chapter, okay? There's a little bit more to talk about here. If you have any questions on what I presented in these videos, we can talk about that. We'll finish doing how we stop bleeding on Monday.